Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu unserem Webinar über die Auswirkungen der Corona-Krise auf Sri Lanka und Bangladesch. Zwei sehr wichtige Länder, wie Sie sehen werden, wo sich auch die Krise sehr unterschiedlich ausgewirkt hat. Mein Name ist Robert Luck, ich bin der Wirtschaftsdelegierte am Außenwirtschaftszentrum New Delhi und unter anderem auch zuständig für diese beiden Länder. Meine Damen und Herren, nachdem alle Präsentationen auf Englisch erfolgen werden, erlauben Sie mir jetzt ins Englische zu wechseln. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar. My name is Robert Luck. I'm the Austrian Trade Commissioner at the Austrian Embassy Commercial Section here in New Delhi. After a short overview from my side about both countries, we will give you with our expert presenters an overview about the present situation and the economic outlook in both countries. And then in part 3, we will go into more detail how to navigate the corona crisis as a businessman, as somebody who is doing business or interested to do business in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Since many Austrian companies are involved in infrastructure projects, both in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, financing also plays a crucial part for many companies. So for that reason, we will touch also the topic of on co-financing and risk-sharing solutions for projects in these two countries. And at the end, we're going to have our great Q&A session. Now let me get back to Sri Lanka very briefly, ladies and gentlemen. Sri Lanka, with a population of 21.7 million people, has recorded its first corona case late in January, and up to date there are 2,810 reported cases in Sri Lanka, and as of now only 500 active cases. So in other words, Sri Lanka has handled the corona crisis exceptionally well, even better than Austria and many other countries in Europe. However, due to the fact that the tourism and the garment industry count to the most important sectors of the Sri Lanka economy, they took, of course, a heavy toll. No tourism, the tourists were coming to Sri Lanka, and also the garment industry lost lots of orders in Europe and overseas. And that, of course, had a negative impact on the economy. You will hear all the details later. Just very briefly, politically, the parliament in Sri Lanka was dissolved on March 2nd due to various reasons, elections, but mostly also for the corona crisis. The election has been postponed twice. The new election date stands on August 5th, and I hope, we all hope this election date will hold. A very brief glance on the bilateral trade relations between Austria and Sri Lanka. It has to be said that many Austrian companies over the past years have done some very interesting and successful infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, mainly water treatment plants, healthcare, and also in the education sector. The volume of these whole projects amounted so far to close to 100 million euro, 98 million euro. And these are, of course, still opportunities in the future, because Sri Lanka, as well as Bangladesh, by the way, both countries are striving to improve their infrastructure further. On the bilateral trade side, I have put down here the numbers for you. You can see a huge trade surplus in in favor of Sri Lanka. Austrian exports last year reached 74 million euros, a plus of 18%. Therefore, Sri Lanka is considered one of the most promising markets for us in Southeast Asia. What do we export to Sri Lanka? It's medical and equipment, agricultural machinery, but also synthetic fibers as commodities, as raw materials for the textile and garment industry in Sri Lanka. And of course, in return, the majority of the 138 million of exports of Sri Lanka to Austria is garments and textile products. Unfortunately, in the first 3 months of this year, things took a turn to the worse. Sri Lanka, Austrian exports to the Sri Lanka, really there was a precipitous fall of minus 66% and in the other direction of 72%. In the meanwhile, unfortunately, import ban in Sri Lanka is in place. We will hear about that later. Now, Bangladesh, ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh is a country with an extraordinary achievement in the last 20 years or so. Bangladesh was 40-50 years ago counted among the poorest nations in the world, and now in 2015 they reached the status as a lower middle income country, as one of the most densely populated countries in the world, with a population of 161 million people. Bangladesh was really able to reduce the poverty rate from 49% to 24% over 20 years, and this is quite a remarkable achievement. This, one of the reasons for that was really a steady GDP growth over the years, yearly growth always to the tune of around 6%. We hope that very soon, or not to the distant future, Bangladesh will come back to these figures. In Bangladesh, there were 232,000 reported COVID cases as of yesterday, so quite a high number. And the GDP is expected to grow this year to the tune of 1.6%, and next year, hopefully 3.7% will be reached again. This is, by the way, the figures from the World Bank. Bilateral trade 2019, you can see quite an impressive import-export figure of Bangladesh to Austria, 807 million euro, a plus of 8% last year. And Austrian exports 92 million euros, a plus of 21%. Bangladesh, of course, is famous for its garments exports. Austria is no exception. And the majority of these 807 million euros comprises textiles and garment exports due to the practically zero customs policy rates, customs duty rates in Europe, which of course includes Austria. But Austrian exports also equipment, fiber, synthetic fibers as a material for raw material for the textile industry. Also medical equipment and agricultural equipment are our major export items. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Mr. Thorsten Backfrede. Mr. Backfrede is the head of the Political Trade and Communication section of the EU delegation in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and he will talk about the present situation and the economic outlook. Thorsten, you have the floor. Please start with the presentation.
Ja, vielen Dank, Robert. Good morning, Wien. Good afternoon, South Asia. So I will try to give you a bit of a broad overview on the economic and trade situation as we see it. Some of the specifics will later be picked up by John, I think, in particular those that are of concern for companies. Now, to start with, Sri Lanka is not the biggest growing economy in South Asia. It's number 7 out of 8 in the recent statistics of the World Bank. Nevertheless, it had, at least in the beginning of the year, 3.7% growth of the beginning of last year. The Eastern terror attacks of April brought a big economic shock to start with. Tourism was brought down to a halt nearly. Sri Lanka just started recovering slowly, in particular the tourism sector, until the COVID crisis hit the country. The central bank expects 1 to 1.5% growth in 2020, but frankly, most people believe this is not realistic. Other international financial organizations expect rather a small recession of -1% or similar. So this has also led the World Bank to downgrade, so to say, Sri Lanka from an upper middle income country to a lower middle income country. And that happened based on the 2019 figures. So even before COVID-19, Sri Lanka sort of slightly lost in terms of its income status. The reason is not negative growth, but rather the exchange rate. So for the World Bank, they measure in dollar terms, and since there was a depreciation of the currency, the World Bank slightly downgraded, which as a positive side effect means that Sri Lanka will continue to benefit from GSP Plus in their exports to the European Union. GSP Plus, of course, provides unilateral trade concessions to partner countries, and Sri Lanka would have normally transitioned out as an upper middle income country, but will now stay a bit longer with these benefits. The inflation is more or less under control. The rate now 6%. It might go slightly up, but it's not a key issue at this point. Now, I would like to talk a bit about fiscal policy because it has an important impact as well on the larger macroeconomic and economic situation. To start with the beginning, so to say, there was a new president that was elected in November 2019, who immediately installed an interim government with sort of a minority in parliament, but with tacit support of the parliament. Elections were planned for April of the parliament, and only then we would have a fully established new cabinet and government. However, the interim cabinet already made some drastic fiscal reforms, drastic in the sense that taxes were cut to a large degree. VAT was nearly half, from 15% to 8%. Other taxes were cut as well. All of this leading over the year to an estimated loss of public revenue of $2 billion. Now that was before COVID. So this means that the government has lost, in a sense, all fiscal space to react to the COVID crisis with large government spending, as you would see in other countries. The aim, of course, was fairly political, with the April elections in mind, not being able to produce a new budget without parliamentary majority. The government felt tax cuts would be a quick stimulus to the economy, and also make voters ahead of elections being inclined to choose their party. Now, COVID came, so it's in the worst possible moment for the government. In addition, it will, just waiting for the next slide, sorry. In addition, the government has to pay external debt this year to, sorry, I'm trying to move the slide, sorry. Yeah. So, yeah, this goes faster. So the government will have to pay back substantial external debt, up to $6 billion during the year. and will need all the hard currency they have in the reserves for that purpose already. Now, they might most likely need a new IMF program. For the moment, these discussions are halted, also because the fiscal reforms, the massive tax cuts, so to say, were frankly a direct challenge to the IMF. Over years, the IMF advised the government to increase revenue and to have a more solid, to get into a more solid fiscal position. And in one policy measure, this was all swept away by the new government. So the IMF will not necessarily rush to come back to the table. We all wait for the elections on 5th of August to see where this is going. As mentioned, the fiscal position has worsened with the COVID crisis, and the government is now trying to get debt moratoria, get additional loans from various sources, also from the Asian Development Bank, but also bilateral partners, India and China, are in discussion to either provide currency swaps through central banks, direct loans, or other. At this moment, the official reserves stand at 6.5 billion, which is roughly about 3 to 4 months of imports, which is fine. But knowing that still 5 billion will have to pay back, there's a risk that the country goes towards foreign currency crisis. Public revenues, as to be expected, with the COVID crisis, went down alongside other countries as well. Budget deficit was rising up to 7.9% probably for 2020, as estimated by the central bank. This is very large. And as I mentioned before, this is not only due to COVID, but also the measures already taken beforehand. So public debt in total is already reaching 90% of GDP, which is high. And this mixture of a weak fiscal position, unsustainable fiscal policies, and the increasing debt level have led a number of rating agencies to downgrade Sri Lanka already. For example, Finch, but also Moody's and others. It's interesting to look at who Sri Lanka owes their debt. There's a widely spread discussion about the China being an important debtor there. There's talk of a debt trap. Countries like Sri Lanka might get in if they rely too much on China. But in reality, as you will see on this slide, it's only 13% of the external debt that is owed to China at first sight. So Japan has nearly a similar position, as does the World Bank. However, also a lot of the private debt from the market is owed to Chinese private banks. So that puts it in a slightly different angle. Overall, the external debt situation will, of course, influence as well the rest of the economic policies. There is I mentioned before, foreign currency shortage at the moment. The reason is that the biggest foreign currency earners are the workers' remittances, the tourism sector, and exports. And all three heavily suffered from the COVID-19 crisis. So in total, remittances went down by 20% year to year so far, from workers in the Gulf nations, but also in other countries. The other foreign currency earner, tourism, of course, was hit even further. It was, I mentioned, was just covering up a bit in December, January from the Eastern terror attack shock, and came basically to zero now, since the airport remains closed since March for foreign tourists or for foreign visitors. This will take a while. Some say probably here to pick up again, so that for tourism to come to sort of where it was before, but it will be very gradual. I think nobody's expecting much, to be quite honest, before the end of the year. The airport will only gradually open. It's not something that will go very quickly. Foreign direct investments, there's a mixed picture there. They have increased since since the end of the war, in particular, and since 2009, sorry. Let me check if I get next slide here. It takes a little while. There we go. Yeah, so there was a bit of a rush after 2009. The country, after 30 years of civil war, was opening up. Growth figures were going up as well, a lot, because there was an infrastructure sort of shortage after such a long war, and a lot of that was financed by external debt as well. There was a target this year of 2 million of foreign direct investment. The government did not fully achieve that. There are a number of special schemes that are offered to foreign investors. John might talk more about that. But overall, there was a bit of a caution last year, I think, also because of the shifting government policies. It was becoming clear that new government will come in. And so for investors I feel there was a wait and see approach. Now, coming back to the most important, from our viewpoint, policy measure put in place by the government since the COVID crisis. There's the import ban that was imposed in April, from April onwards, in various regulations, to get control of the foreign currency crisis. At least this was the postulated goal of these measures. So products we're choosing that are considered non-essential. That includes all cars, a lot of technology as well. But in updated list, we also see a lot of agricultural products included, and we also see and hear politicians clearly saying, well, this is not only about our currency reserves, it's also to help our agriculture and about local production. So what we see is that this temporary ban was prolonged end of June and early July in 2 different measures, and is now there until further notice, probably still until the end of the year, but that's not fully clear. We also heard political speeches saying that from the president that food self-sufficiency would be a primary goal of the government, which I understand is something quite different than food safety, food stability. Singapore, for example, doesn't produce anything, but is very food secure because the borders are open and they can import whatever they need. Now, there's an old indication that these import regulations are just a sign of an emerging policy of import substitution, and protectionist measures are increasing in various other ways. For example, public procurement rules were just changed to give a clear advantage to local firms whenever possible, within certain criteria. Our EU trade services at the European Commission in Brussels estimated that roughly 20% of EU exports are concerned by these import regulations. Our ambassador, the EU ambassador in Geneva, will reach out this week to the ambassador of Sri Lanka to make clear that the European Union believes that this is not in line with WTO obligations of Sri Lanka, where all quantitative restrictions to trade should be avoided at all costs. And would be different if simply duties were increased, but to have an entire ban is not in line with the multilateral trading system. However, there's a legal argument, but we also bring forward that we simply believe that this is not good for Sri Lanka. Import substitution will reduce productivity, competitiveness. It has unintended effects, and of course, it's not at all in the interest of European companies. So we will continue engaging with the government on these issues, but everybody is waiting now for the 5th of August elections, essentially. The ban had already first effect. Trade is nearly balanced now because the import reduced so much due to the ban. However, exports are very reduced as well in the COVID-19 context. Apparel exports of Sri Lanka will take some time. Others, I think, were already recovering. Overall, good to know the EU has a trade surplus of over 2.1 billion with Sri Lanka in 2019. Also because with GSP Plus, Sri Lanka has, of course, tariff-free access to the European market in over 60% of product lines. So let's have a quick glimpse in the future to wrap up. What are the things to look out for when considering the situation in Sri Lanka? I think the next couple of months will show us a bit clearer where this country is going, also in its economic policies. Some of the measures we've seen might or might not be largely aimed at the elections on 5th of August and populist in nature, and maybe a new fully formed government might take a more open position towards international trade and investment. However, indications are this could also not be the case, and the government will continue a more inward-looking protectionist stance. One clear indicator will be these import ban regulations. Will they be phased out soon, or will they stay until the end of the year or beyond? Another thing to watch out is the fiscal position of the government. After the election, negotiations with the IMF will certainly have to start. On 1st of October, the government will have to pay $1 billion back to the bond market. So there's a bit of a deadline coming to avoid default for the government. And so they will have to find these additional resources, either through an IMF structural program with a number of difficult steps that this will imply, or through bilateral partners like China or India, if they are inclined to bail out Sri Lanka in that dimension. And finally, of course, we will also have to see, once a new government is in place, how is the general business climate and regulation working out for businesses. The overall theme of the new president is that they want to make it easier for businesses to operate, that they want to be a technocratic government that rewards excellence and is not sort of protectionist in nature. However, what we've seen so far, there was not much good news from a European viewpoint, in the sense that national companies are clearly put in an advantage, and competition and opening up to the world is not always portrayed as the beneficial direction for Sri Lanka. So, but let's see how the new government will position itself. Yeah, let me stop here and hand over the floor to my next colleague, and let me know if there are any questions later.
Thank you very much, Thorsten, for your very interesting presentation. However, may I ask before I invite the next speaker? Oh, he's here already, and Mr. Abul Qasim Khan, Chairperson of the Trustee Board of Business Initiative Leading Development in Dhaka, short called BUILD. BUILD is also our cooperation partner in Bangladesh, and we're very happy to work with you together, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan is also the former president of the Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and as such, a really eminent expert. Before I give you the floor, Mr. Khan, may I kindly ask all the other upcoming speakers to have a little bit the time in view also. Everybody got 15 minutes, otherwise, because we have to be fair also to our last speakers now. Thank you very much. Mr. Khan, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robert, for inviting Bill to today's program. I will present on the Bangladesh scenario, on the COVID impact, and also the economic outlook for Bangladesh. As you know, the COVID situation has affected all the economies in the world, and Bangladesh is no different. If you see my first slide, the government has revised the target, which was set at 8.2% for the year. It has been now revised to 5.2%. But again, the government is hopeful that the economic revival would continue and Bangladesh would revert back to the original 8% plus growth targets. And also our private public investment has gone down to 20.8%. and also the growth, export growth and export market has been affected due to the cancellation of many of the orders, which I will present in the next slide. Good thing about Bangladesh is the government is hopeful in the recovery process, and we are hopeful that we can gain some of the momentum that has been or that is being lost. If we see the sectoral impact of the COVID in the major sectors, I've just highlighted few of the major sectors of the country. RMG sector, which is the major export for Bangladesh, it contributes about 82% of our exports, and we are the second largest exporter in the world. Cancellation of $3 billion US dollars and closure of 1,150 factories have created a big impact on our economy and the export market. Although buyers are placing orders for essential and medical clothing instead of other items, it is a good sign. And some of the RMG ready-made garment factories are adding new product lines since there is a new demand for the PPE and the medical clothing market. And on the agriculture sector, obviously there has been a huge loss of $710 million. But the good thing is that we are ensuring food security during the COVID period. So this is a big achievement for our agriculture sector. In the leather sector also, we have seen cancellation of orders amounting to 200 million. And because most of the leather processed import raw materials are imported for China, and there was a disruption in the supply sourcing, we lost a lot of good orders. If you look at the frozen food sector, we have lost about $71 million. These are all estimated figures. The losses may be higher. On the food and bakery industry, there is a huge loss. So the overall sector, as many of the countries are going through the COVID situation, are losing a lot of economic value, and Bangladesh is no different. And this is the FDI scenario for Bangladesh. Bangladesh is attracting good FDI, but it is not as per its potentials. Bangladesh is currently attracting about 1% of its GDP. The government had initially set a target of almost 3%, which has not been achieved. So we look forward for achieving this target, and it is one of the top priority of the government to attract more FDI. If you see the top 6 foreign investors in Bangladesh in 2019, first is China, almost investing about $626 million, followed by United Kingdom, 416, Singapore, 272 million, United States, 198, Norway, 194, Netherlands, 192. So these are the major investors in Bangladesh. And most of these investments are coming in the power and energy sector. Banking has attracted some new investments. Food, textile, woven, telecommunication are the top sectors that is receiving good number of FDI. So what is Bangladesh? I'm saying it's advantage Bangladesh. One of the fastest growing countries in the world before the COVID happened. We have grown about 6% over the last 25 years. Reached 8% plus growth in 2019 itself. We are the 8th largest country in terms of population. Country competitiveness is a top priority for the government. We want to increase our competitiveness to attract more investment. Infrastructure is one of our areas where we need to invest, and strong economic foundation. We are receiving a lot of interest from China. China has committed about $34 billion in our infrastructure. The One Belt, One Road plan and the connectivity between China, Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar corridor is very important for Bangladesh and the regional development. The India connectivity, we are surrounded by India. it is Bangladesh. India is more accessible from Bangladesh than India. So there is another huge market for interregional trade. Japan has shown a lot of interest in Bangladesh. It has initiated the Big B, Bay of Bengal Industrial Growth Belt project, to accelerate the industrialization of Bangladesh and also to create a gateway between Southeast Asia and South Asia. The government has also initiated a project called Special Economic Zones, where 100 economic zones would be established in the next 10 years, and with a target of 40 billion in exports and 10 million new jobs to be created. So there are a lot of advantages for Bangladesh. We have a strong economic foundation. We are government is business friendly, and we are trying to make our country more attractive in terms of creating more competitive advantages. And there are a lot of interest in Bangladesh from the regional players as well. And so I have basically divided the advantage into 5 particular areas. One is location advantage. If you see, Bangladesh is located between the 2 Asian giants of India and China. So it makes our position unique. We are also very close to the ASEAN market. We have the access to 3 billion plus population and their markets. So the location is an advantage for Bangladesh and for investors to explore. Second is market advantage. Recently, China has given us 97% duty-free access. About 8,340 goods have been allowed duty-free access to the Chinese market. This opens a new dimension for Bangladeshi exports into the Chinese market, and even for foreign investors to manufacture products and export from Bangladesh. Do we have duty-free access in the EU up to 99%, Australia at 100%, Canada at 98.6%, Japan at 97%, New Delhi, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland at 100%. So we have a market advantage. Demographic dividend is something very important for Bangladesh. We have a competitive labor. Our demographic dividend will last till 2042. And we have one of the largest labor force because of our population. Growth advantage, as I mentioned, one of the fastest growing countries in the world. PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, added Bangladesh in its PwC 30 list as one of the long-term potential growth economies by 2050. Opportunity advantage, Bangladesh needs to increase. If you just look at infrastructure, we are now investing about 3% of our GDP into infrastructure, which needs to be around 6 to 7%. So there has to be a huge investment into the infrastructure. What we have projected, about 20 billion is required every year, estimated to be $320 billion needed for only infrastructure up to the year 2030. There is a large domestic market, rising consumer demand. And if you see the strategic location of Bangladesh in the map, you see that within 2 to 3 hours, we are well connected with cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, on the Indian country. We are well connected with China at Kunming, Chengdu, Bangkok in Thailand, Hanoi in Vietnam. So it's well positioned, and only 2-3 hours flight would connect you to the rest of the world. Okay, so advantage Bangladesh, again, talking about where are we. So as per the PwC projections, which I mentioned, Bangladesh will become the 20th largest country by the year 2030. It will be larger than Vietnam, South Africa, and the Netherlands. By 2050, Bangladesh will be 23rd largest country in the world, with a GDP size of bigger than that of Malaysia, Thailand. And it will be considered one of the top fastest growing country until the year 2050. So if you see the growth projections for Bangladesh, even the reports say very positive on Bangladesh. We are setting up special economic zones to attract our foreign investors, and we have one of the largest zones coming into Bangladesh, which is called the Mireshwar Economic Zones. It has attracted a lot of investment commitments from renowned companies from Honda Motors, Sumitomo from Japan, Asian Paints, Berger Paints, TIC Group, Advani Group of India. The countries that have separate economic zones are Japan, China, South Korea, Thailand, US, Australia, India, and Thailand, which are investing in these zones. So this is an opportunity for the Austrian companies to invest in these zones as well. And these are the leading agencies who are working to attract FDI. These are all government agencies. The Prime Minister's office is there. They are supporting the investment authorities in terms of getting support and assistance wherever needed. We have the Bangladesh Economic Zones, the Zones Authority, which is establishing the 100 zones. They are the regulators. They themselves have establishing the largest zone. We have the High Tech Park, which aims to attract ICT and IT companies into Bangladesh. And obviously, we have the Security Exchange Commission for the capital markets. Austria Business Delegation to Bangladesh started visiting from 2018, and we are supporting them. And last February, the visit by Dr. Robert Luck and his team came to Dhaka. So we are creating good communication and interest from Austrian-Bangladesh relationship. This is the current scenario for the export-import between the two countries. There is room to grow. I will not go into the details. There are opportunities for both countries to explore the markets. In the capital machinery, equipment, organic, chemical, animal food, zinc, even in the RMG sector for Bangladesh to export. These are the emerging sectors during COVID. The PPE market is there, the medical PPE, pharmaceutical industry, food, e-commerce. Our foreign reserves have gone up, so that is a good sign for the recovery process. The bicycle industry is something creating new demand. I'm almost done, and these are the areas where Austrian companies can invest. So because of time, I think I have to end, but the slides are given to all the participants, those who can have a look, and I'll be here for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Khan, for your very interesting presentation. As he mentioned already, all the presentations will be made available for you via links, so you can read them in all details. Next, we are going now in further detail how to navigate this crisis in these two countries, what needs to be observed, what tips can we, hints can we take home. And for this, I would like to invite John Wilson, Director of the European Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka. A very warm welcome to you. The European Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka is also our cooperation partner, like built in Bangladesh. John, you have the floor. So we have a slight technical hiccup. We hope we can resolve this soon. If not, we will continue with the next presentation and just switch the presentations. Mrs. Begum, are you there? Mrs. Begum, would you be able to continue to take your presentation first, and then John can join in later?
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
Mrs. Begum is the CEO of Built, our business partner in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much to the presentation. Actually, in this presentation, we would try to tell something in regard to the legal system and the policies that government has taken so far in regard to addressing the COVID situation and some tax-related issues and the compliances issues that have been announced by the government and some recommendations also. So to start with, actually this is the comprehensive picture of the plan and policies and strategies taken by the government, as some of the issues has already been explained by the chairperson of BILD. But I would like to just give a small summary. Say, the government has taken fiscal and monetary measures to battle the COVID-19 and so far announced about 12.50 billion stimulus package for the SMEs, large agricultural sector, employment generation and social safety net. Also, government has very concerned in regard to attracting the foreign direct investment, export diversification, and sustainability through creating some decent employment generation. In that respect, government has taken very specific 4 strategies that they will discourage luxury expenditure and prioritize the government spending and thus creating jobs.
Excuse me, can I just briefly interrupt you? Could you try to speak a little bit closer to your microphone? We hardly can understand you.
Okay. And another strategy for ease of financing from the commercial banks so that industries and individuals can get subsidized banking finance. And at the same time, encouraging strengthening the social safety net and also to increase the money supply and control the pressure, inflationary pressure of the economy. As has already been mentioned by Dr. Robert, that World Bank has predicted that the economy in the year 2 will grow at 1.6%, and it will go up to 1.0% in 21. But Bangladesh government thinks that even though in the year 2019 they have not been able to achieve the target, and they have to revise the target up to 5.2% of GDP growth. But they hope that in the year 2021 they would be able to catch up with the regular growth, and it will be around 8.2%, 20%. Similarly, they have projection that they will achieve 8.3%, 30% in the year 2022. And similarly, they would achieve another higher growth, about 8.30% in the year 2023. Sorry. This is the financial stimulus package, as has been mentioned already, that it is about 12.50%, which is about 12.50 billion, which is about 3.7% of the total GDP. And government has announced around about 22 types of stimulus packages. And as you are aware, that first COVID case in Bangladesh has been reported in March 18, and after that, government has taken some drastic actions, and they have imposed some lockdown, and they have introduced healthcare facilities, and at the same time, workplace safeties. So there are a number of, I think, measures have been taken by the government, and there are, I think, in regard to the, I think, handling the COVID issues, government has formed a number of committees. There are national committees, some technical committees, and they have also gone for zoning maps, that is red, yellow, green, and gradually they are taking different types of steps to handle this COVID situation. There are some district committees also, and the Directorate General of Health Services regularly updates the mass people of the country regarding the COVID situation. And so far, we have seen that about 3,000 cases of deaths in our countries. And as Dr. Robert has already mentioned, so far around 3 lakhs cases of infection has been found in our country. So these are some socio-economic measures taken to tackle the COVID situations. Government has strictly informed the businesses that there should not be any layoffs, And there is a number of announcement of aid for the underprivileged people and the incentives for the frontline workers, that is doctors and nurses. They have been given some special incentives. At the same time, government also taken some extraordinary steps and some, I think, some announcement of financial incentives for the migrants workers who have lost their jobs and coming back to the country. And so far, I would like to inform you some of the legal steps taken by the government to facilitate, especially foreign investments and also the local investments. Some of the, I think, very important and attractive legal steps that can be mentioned here is that very recently government is trying to encourage the foreign investment in the e-commerce field. And in the past, there were a bar that 49% could be the foreign investors proportion, and the 51% would need to be coming from the local investment. But now 100% joint venture stake is allowed in our country. And there are some specific allocation for the public-private partnership projects. And Bangladesh Bank has also announced a number of initiatives to, I think, to facilitate and ease the repatriation of the foreign investors, repatriation of money for the foreign investors. And at the same time, government is also allowing and trying to establish some fintech or the expansion of the financial technology to make the ease of doing business and the repatriation of the income and earnings of the foreign investors. Interest rate has also been lowered, and there is a central database established for close monitoring of the large farm loans. At the same time, public financial management also reached at the international standard, and government also has taken some different types of financial tools to ease the venture capital. And at the same time, government recently announced a Bangladeshi Taka denominated Bangla bond for the first time at the London Stock Exchange. And not only that, stamp duty on the trust deed in the bond markets have also been reduced. And also, there are some simplified process for company operation in Bangladesh, and you will be happy to know that Bangladesh Security Exchange Commission has introduced a very nice law or some provision to raise the paid-up capital up to about, I think, 100 crore, which is about 24 million US dollar, without any permission from the Securities Exchange Commission. Earlier it was too low. And there was a mandatory provision, and this has been simplified in regard to the having company seal. And you know that the Companies Act in Bangladesh is going to be simplified and reformed, and 1% company has agreed. Not only that, the Foreign Private Investment Promotion and Protection Act has also been simplified and reformed. Now, portfolio investment for non-resident, including foreign investors, enterprises in the shares and securities, are also allowed. There are some links also given so that you can see later. And very recently, government has announced a very nice, I think, policies for allowing dividend payable to the foreign shareholders, and it may be credited to the FC accounts maintained in Bangladesh. And also 75% of net monthly income in equivalent foreign currency may be credited to the foreign currency accounts. And there are some Bangladesh also announced Bangladesh government treasury bond, and where the foreigners and non-resident Bangladeshis can also invest. And very recently, credit guarantee scheme for cottage, micro and small industries have also been announced. And by these ways, small and cottage industries will get additional benefits. There are some tax-related initiatives taken by the government, lifting import taxes on medical and protective equipments of about 17 items by National Board of Revenue. There is a list given there, so you can have a look later. And also, government has issued a number of SROs for easing the doing business in Bangladesh. And the presentation has given a list of some of the SROs. And these are the SROs available in the website of the NBR. And there is the list. I do not like to go in details, but you can see, and it is available in the website. And government also has taken some more tax-related, I think, policies. And there is relaxation of value-added tax and API, activated pharmaceutical ingredients. This has been produced in the country, and VAT and tax has already been, I think, reduced for this purpose. There is tax exemption for private power generation company. And one of the very important aspect in that regard, I would like to mention that income of the private power generation companies has been exempted up to December 2034, and there are some other benefits that have been allowed for these private power generation companies. And these are the list of the SROs. As I have already mentioned that through these SROs, government has allowed a number of trade supportive measures so that the local and foreign investors can get some additional benefits because of this emergence of the COVID-19 situation. And as our chairperson has already mentioned, that the duty-free quota-free access is available for the country. These are allowed by European Union, Australia, Canada, China, Iceland, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, etc. Almost 100% duty-free facilities has been availed by Bangladesh, so foreign investors can take the benefit out of it, because in some of the cases Bangladesh do not have enough supply side. They are facing some supply side constraints, so foreign investments will very much, I think, attracted in that sectors. These are some of the compliance issues, and we have tried to, I think, divide the total compliance issues under 5 specific areas. These are social distancing, using the mask, proper use of the sanitizers, hand wash, and these infectants, isolation and leave of ill employees. This is one of the very, I think, important announcement by the government, that if there is some employees they are facing some problems or not well very much, they can be given leave. And management of the hazardous waste, this is another important areas, and some guidelines and different types of I think extraordinary cautions have been announced in that respect. These are some of the compliance measures and guidelines by the government. There is administrative enforcement, availability of the safety equipment, coordination with some of the other issues. And not only that, some of the specific sectors, RMG and textile, and the leather sectors also, they on their own have announced and have prepared their guidelines. And there is a special and a specific guidelines also for hospital waste management, for isolation and incineration of medical waste, and the government is giving, I think, enough importance in that respect. I am also going to be complete my presentation very soon. There is only 1 or 2 slides remain. There are some business opportunities which I believe is that in regard to the medical solutions, there is a serious need for ventilators, ICU related equipment, technologies which are scarce in Bangladesh, and e-health solution is another area Bangladesh is very much required in that respect. Testing and laboratories, these are also, because there are new types of I think products such as testing kits, including rapid kits, etc., has got tremendous demand at the moment. So there is a serious need for testing and laboratory advanced. I think testing and laboratory is required in our country at the moment. And advanced biosafety level laboratories is also very much required, for which Bangladesh needs technology, expert and expertise also. Hospital management is one of the #1 priority at the moment, because the hospitals are struggling hard. Not only that, cleaning and safety equipment, waste management systems, digital business opportunities. These are some of the areas where there are tremendous business opportunities, and government is, I think, sincerely attracting the foreign investments in that respect, and there could be joint investments also, joint venture investments also in that. And the last slide, I would like to show, these are some of the recommendations I would like to inform. Duty-free, quota-free benefits, as we have already mentioned, that foreign investors may take the benefit out of it by using the rules of country origin of Bangladesh. Telecommunication and hotel industry is open for investment in Bangladesh. High-tech industrial park, they are open. There are 12 high-tech parks waiting for the foreign investments, and ICT, software, robotics. These are the sectors can be encouraged there. Hospital industry is also one of the interesting area. Not only that, in case of logistics sectors, potential Austrian companies may invest in small cargo handling, warehousing, etc. And Bangladesh has recently, I think, has the guidelines for communicable disease prevention, control, and eradication Act 2018. And under this, government has incorporated some life-threatening novel coronavirus I think issues. In that respect, the government needs special measures to be needed to be tackle the battle of COVID-19, and Bangladesh is seeking FDI in that respect also. And RMG sector has already been mentioned, and healthcare is another issue, and venture can also be sought in that respect. And at the same time, sectors such as medical equipment, technology, ICT has got high potentials. And we have Bangladesh Industrial Development Authority, and they have their one-stop service centers. And not only that, high-tech parks and Bangladesh export zone, export processing zone, visa has also their one-stop service centers. And they are providing most of the services now digitally. So I think the Austrian companies may think to come to Bangladesh and with their joint ventures or their foreign direct investments in Bangladesh. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you so very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Next, we are switching back now to Sri Lanka. John Wilson is ready. John, may I invite you to turn on your camera and your microphone, and you can start now your presentation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So sorry about that. I have no idea what happened, but technology is like that. Anyway, it's great to be here on this webinar. Guten Morgen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Aiwan and Vanakkam, everyone, wherever you are. It's a pleasure for me to present to you all some information and insights on navigating the COVID-19 crisis in Sri Lanka. In the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, I intend to provide you with a high-level overview of the Sri Lankan experience of COVID-19, the current situation in Sri Lanka, and some information about COVID-19 impacts, particularly in the employment, travel, economy, and legal spheres. I'll then move on to talk about the parliamentary elections, which also Thorsten mentioned. These, as you know, will be held on the 5th of August, and they're much awaited and anticipated. I'll also talk a bit about the manifestos of the three main political parties and what I see as a rather worrying trend of protectionism. I'll also talk about some areas. I will try to end on an optimistic note. So I'll try and talk a little about some areas where there may be prospects for investment and good business in the future before concluding my presentation. Now, the government of Sri Lanka has received a great deal of praise internationally for the decisive and the quick measures that it took to deal with the coronavirus crisis. The government promptly took some initiatives in March to deal with the spread of the virus. The main measure being the imposition of a nationwide curfew. And there were also social distancing measures enforced during periods of relaxation of curfew. So when people were allowed out to go and buy food, for example. And right at the start of this all, there was a work from home policy announced in March. In May, gradually, the curfew started to be relaxed, as the government would say. We are relaxing the curfew. And from early June, the restrictions were further relaxed, with public transport being allowed. Offices and businesses and factories had in the meantime been allowed to open. Initially, the government had planned to open the airport from the 1st of August, but now it looks like this will only happen in mid-September, if we're lucky. Otherwise, we might all be stuck in Sri Lanka till at least December. I think a key point I'd like to make here is that all persons who have tested positive for the virus from the 30th of April onwards were in certain clusters, as they call them. These were at quarantine centers, an unfortunate incident at a Navy camp where many Navy sailors were infected, and their close contacts. So from the 28th of June, the curfew has been lifted completely, and we're free to go out during the day, during the night. And as at 28th July 2020, if you are to accept the figures and what we are being told, you can see there have only been 11 deaths. In the field of employment and the impact of COVID-19, the government has released some operational guidelines. You can see them on the screen on preparedness and the response for COVID-19 outbreak for work settings. There's actually a link there at the bottom. So if anyone is interested in reading that document, you can do that via the link. The guidelines provide for various things. You know, when you have employees coming into the workplace, they have to have their temperature checked. There has to be a record kept. There has to be sanitizers here, there. People are supposed to maintain social distancing at work, wearing of masks, that sort of thing. And these guidelines are, although perhaps there are legal arguments that there is very little legal basis for them, but they are being treated as mandatory by the government. And probably if there was a violation or if there was a case of COVID-19 and it could be traced back to a particular workplace, for sure the public health inspectors would come in and close down the establishment. So best to comply. Here on the next slide, if it works. Yes, you can see some best practices in social distancing measures. This is a photograph of a canteen where people are having their lunch and they're well separated from each other. Now, obviously, COVID-19 had dramatic impacts on the economy. Businesses, factories, and shops could not function due to the curfew, but they had to keep on paying salaries. There was no space for cost-cutting measures, such as unilateral pay cuts, since that is illegal under Sri Lankan law, unless you get the consent of the employee. It's also not legally possible for an employer to lay off or retrench employees due to the legislation, which you can see up on the slide, the much discussed Termination of Workmen Special Provisions Act, number 45 of 1971. Now, what that act does is that it says that an employer who employs more than 15 people in scheduled employment, it's basically pretty much everything, cannot terminate the employment of an employee. So in the COVID-19 context, that means you cannot lay off your workers, you cannot retrench them without obtaining the consent of the Commissioner of Labour. And there is a process for seeking approval which involves an inquiry where the employer makes the case of the employer, why the employer needs to lay off or why the employer needs to retrench, and the employee is also given an opportunity to be heard. So now, obviously, this was not practicable during the curfew period. So something had to be done. And what actually happened was that there was a discussion between the government of Sri Lanka and the largest union of employers, right? That's called the EFC, the Employers Federation of Ceylon, as well as certain trade unions representing employees. An agreement was reached, which is commonly referred to as the tripartite agreement. And you can see a summary on the screen. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but the consequence of the agreement is that if you, as an employer, have to have some of your employees stay at home, not able to work, either because there's no business or because of health measures, then you don't have to pay the full salary. There's a way of calculating a pro rata amount, and this is supposed to give some relief to employers. I think some employers feel the measures are not nearly good enough, but there you have it. It's a compromised agreement. Now, talking about other COVID impacts, I briefly mentioned it already. Foreign nationals are not allowed to enter Sri Lanka until further notice, and all types of visa issuance have been temporarily suspended. So it's impossible for anyone, and there are few exceptions for diplomats, and there have been some repatriation flights, but it's basically impossible for anyone, whether you're on coming into Sri Lanka as a tourist or for business. It's impossible at the moment to enter Sri Lanka. We've heard from Thorsten about the economic situation, but I think it's worth repeating some of what he said. You know, the pandemic control measures have really had a very huge impact. It's the latest blow to an already very fragile economy, which had been quite understandably very badly affected by the Easter Sunday bombing attacks last year in April, coupled with the huge debt burden. And worst of all, we've created some of our own problems by these numerous incomprehensible tax cuts after the election of a new president last year, which have really tremendously affected adversely government revenue. In one report I read, of course, these are moving figures and it keeps on changing. And in fact, we saw a much more negative figure, or we heard of a much more negative figure when Thorsten spoke. It was stated that growth is predicted to be to come down to 3.2% this year. Well, I think that's totally optimistic. I'm sure it's more in the direction of the figure that Thorsten mentioned. And possibly zero or negative growth next year seems likely, barring an unexpected bounce back. The IMF and others refer to the high economic uncertainty which Sri Lanka faces. And it seems clear that to bridge the gap between revenue and expenditure, while at the same time servicing debt repayments, the gap can only be filled by domestic and foreign investment. So foreign investment is going to be more and more important, I would say, going forward. Now, it's said that we live in unprecedented times. We certainly do. But I would go beyond that and say that much more worrying is the general all-round certainty everywhere, in everything, and everything we do as businesses. Take, for example, contracts and long-term contractual commitments. In these times of instability and heightened risk, I think it's crucially important that more attention is paid to force majeure events and how such events could affect the ability to perform contractual obligations. Force majeure provisions should be drafted and included in contracts so that risks can be allocated properly. Dispute resolution clauses should also be carefully negotiated so that there is a mechanism that can provide a speedy and commercially relevant way to resolve disputes. And obviously, I think there are going to be more and more disputes going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I've provided you up to now with an overview of the COVID-19 measures and impacts, but before moving on to the next section of my presentation, in which I will give you all some high-level information about the parliamentary elections, the manifestos of the parties, and the national policy framework, I would like to mention that very unfortunately, the agreement under negotiation for the avoidance of double taxation between Sri Lanka and Austria seems to have stalled somewhere. The European Chamber has actually raised this issue at a dialogue which was taking place during the previous government. It just seems that the Sri Lankan authorities don't seem to know what's happened. And when I most recently contacted the Austrian side, I was told that it seems that there has not been any developments in the recent years. And now with the whole COVID-19 issue and lockdown, things may get delayed. In my view, it's very important that the government of Sri Lanka, and I think also from the Austrian side, there should be a push from the authorities there to try and get this treaty finalized, as I think it would undoubtedly make Sri Lanka a more attractive destination for investment. I'd now like to talk a bit about the parliamentary elections, which will take place on the 5th of August. On the screen, you can see the pictures of the leaders of the 5 most important political parties. 225 seats are up for grabs. The man with the red scarf that you can see, second from the left on your screen, is the former president of Sri Lanka, the former president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is currently the prime minister. His brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is the current president of Sri Lanka and was elected in November last year, defeating the gentleman whose photo you see in black and white, Sajith Premadasa, formerly of the United National Party, that's the UNP, which is headed by the man whose photograph you can see on the left, Ranil Wickremesinghe. The party of the Rajapaksa brothers is the SLPP, and they hope to obtain a clear majority in the elections, if not a 2/3 majority, on the back of the perceived success of the president and his government in combating the COVID-19 crisis or spread in Sri Lanka. Now, Sajith Premadasa, the man in the middle with the black and white photograph, he has split from the UNP and formed a separate faction, which is called the SJB. If a majority is to be obtained in parliament, it is likely that his faction, the SJB, would either have to reach an accommodation with the UNP or I should say, reach an understanding with the minority parties and even the JVP, whose leaders you can see on the right. It seems likely that the SLPP, that's the Rajapaksas, the brothers' party, will do well. As the UNP, the main contender against them, has effectively split in two. And the UNP is perceived by many as having failed on its promises during the time of the previous government. There was also a massive corruption scandal. I won't go into all of that. On the other hand, Sajith Premadasa of the SJB, who split from the UNP, is perceived by many as the only chance against the Rajapaksa-dominated SLPP. So the key message that I wish to convey in all of this is that the direction that the country takes and the policies that are adopted in matters such as engagement with the West, openness to foreign investment, and trade all depend on the outcome of the election. So I would say watch this space very closely, please. Here you can see a picture of the current president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He has published a national policy framework which contains 10 key policies aimed at achieving the fourfold outcomes of, and I'll just read from the slide, a productive citizenry, a contented family, a disciplined and just society, and a prosperous nation. All good stuff. Now, the national policy framework has apparently been adopted by the SLPP as its manifesto. I'm sorry if you find it a little hard to read the rather small writing here, but I tried to do a comparison side by side. On the left, you can see what the 10 chapters of the National Policy Framework deal with, and I've included certain wording from Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a people-centric economy, as well as policy number 2 in bold typeface, which are of relevance, I think, to the directions that an SLPP government, if it comes into power, would pursue. We see references to import substitution and revisiting harmful bilateral trade agreements. This is in sharp contrast to the policies of the previous UNP government, which caused Sri Lanka to enter into a free trade agreement with Singapore and recommence negotiations with India on expanding and deepening the Indo-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. As for the SJB, it proposes a task force to attract foreign direct investment, and interestingly states that in the field of procurement, unsolicited proposals will no longer be acceptable. The details of the economic plans of the SJB, that's Sajith Premadasa's party, would, it would appear, be worked out after consultations. Now, as I said, the UNP advocates for integration into global supply chains and free trade and is generally welcoming to foreign investment. The SLPP, on the other hand, appears to be a bit more protectionist on the basis of what they have announced in the national policy framework. Now, you'll recall that there was reference in the SLPP's national policy framework to import substitution. Protectionism appears, sadly, I would say, now to be a key part of government policy, and protectionist measures are now actually being implemented. Thorsten Bargfreder talked to you about the import ban. Though apparently initially introduced to ease pressure on the currency, it would appear that several restrictions may remain indefinitely in place in order to protect certain local industries. I will now deal in a bit more detail with the other areas of concern that I have highlighted on the screen. So there have been media reports about a cabinet decision to allow only local contractors to participate in state-funded construction projects. And there is also a rather worrying regulation that has appeared under a piece of legislation that regulates the pharmaceutical sector. That's the National Medicines Regulatory Authority Act. I'll touch on that just now in a little while in more detail. So the newspaper report that I referred to reported that Sri Lanka will restrict all state construction work for domestic construction firms. It was reported that the reduced competition could push up profits of construction firms and raise the costs of state procurement costs overall. It's not clear how the ban will affect foreign-tied funding projects. And interestingly, it's clear that the SLPP thinking is to strongly support the construction industry because as one of the tax cuts, one of the tax measures that Thorsten talked about earlier, Sri Lanka's new administration halved income taxes for construction firms from 28% to 14%, and that has reportedly also been removed on sales in apartment and housing projects. In the fisheries sector, the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources has apparently adopted a new policy. What does this new policy say or mean? Well, apparently, licenses to export seafood would no longer be granted to companies that have more than 49% non-resident shareholding. This is absolutely astounding, particularly given that this is meant to be an open sector, open to 100% non-resident or foreign investment in shares of companies carrying on such businesses. But this new policy is being implemented, even in the case of companies which have been in business for years with more than 49% foreign shareholding, which is quite worrying. On the next slide, you will see reference to the National Medicines Regulatory Authority Act, and in particular Regulation 46.3, which says that the authority may also, at its discretion, refuse to issue a license to a company that does not hold more than 50% shares owned by citizens of Sri Lanka. Again, this is quite astounding. I don't believe it has actually been invoked yet, but if it is, and it affects an existing investment, I think that's really bad news. It sends out the wrong signals entirely when it comes to attracting FDI. Now, on this slide, we see that the uncertainty persists, even in the news media. There is an environment of uncertainty. We all know that foreign investment is desperately needed, but if trade is impeded by bans like the import bans, or if foreign investments are not perceived as being secure, I question which new investor would want to invest in Sri Lanka. This uncertainty is deepened by statements in news reports. Please take a little time to read two articles which appeared in the Financial Times yesterday. On the one hand, there's an article captioned, "The Government Unveils Tax Breaks for the Colombo International Financial Center." And then on the other hand, there's a story in which the Minister of Economic Development, another brother of the Rajapaksas, who says, "I am not a big fan of FDIs. I believe that investments must come, but I'm not saying it has to be from foreign sources. There are local investors who can start a lot of businesses. We have to encourage local entrepreneurship. FDI is not the only way for us to grow. Well, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions to that statement and what it means. Now, permit me to move on to the third part of my presentation. I have to end on a note of optimism, or Robert might never invite me to speak again at one of these webinars. It's clear that the infrastructure of Sri Lanka and its development present many opportunities, particularly in the areas of water, energy, and the climate change mitigation sectors. I've given some details, some very, very broad takeaway points on the slide, and because of time, I won't dwell on those. But particularly, I would say in the climate change field, Sri Lanka's nationally determined contributions policy proposes a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 30% during 2021 to 2030. That's a very ambitious target. And it may well be that there are opportunities for European companies, Austrian companies, which specialize in the kind of technology and solutions that Sri Lanka may need to achieve those targets. Moving on then to one of the other key sectors for investment, which is the water sector. I'll leave you to have a look at the figures later at your leisure. But this gives a summary from the National Water Supply Drainage Board of the projects which could be implemented. There are many, and it just remains to be seen how all of this is going to be funded. But if the funding can be worked out, there are presumably opportunities here for Austrian companies. Finally, if I want to talk a few words about the road ahead, and this is my last slide, well, I would just say, as before, watch this space. We have to see what's going to happen in the parliamentary elections. We have to see what the policies of the new government are going to be, what directions they take. There are great prospects for growth, I think, in a post-COVID era, particularly if a vaccine is developed, there would be a revival of tourism, exports would rebound, and of course, inward remittances from migrant workers would also go up, which are also essential to our economy. If we look at some lessons from the past, Sri Lanka is very resilient. Post the 2004 tsunami, also after the Easter Sunday attacks, there was a fairly, I think, a quicker recovery than many people thought. For sure, there is a good chance that the ban on imports could be relaxed or lifted. So that would mean then it's less difficult for Austrian companies to export to Sri Lanka. But on the other hand, also I would suggest that protectionism and development of local industry in certain sectors may mean that there is increased space for licensing of know-how and new technologies from companies abroad. Certainly, we have to look out for government policy and what the emphases are going to be when it comes to infrastructure development. And finally, the point I would make is that because of our geographic location, sorry to compete with Bangladesh, and our close proximity to major markets, we have many advantages here if there is to be a move away from a concentration of manufacturing in China to other countries to shorten supply chains and maybe diversify supply chains. The European Chamber of Commerce of Sri Lanka is here to help. And if any of the companies present at this webinar need further information, please contact the Chamber. We run a trade and help desk at the Chamber. All one has to do is join the Chamber, and we can provide assistance and market information. Depending on the nature of the query, of course, and how complicated it is, and the work it involved, it would either be provided free of charge or on a paying basis. With that, I conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much for your attention. And once again, apologies for the technical issues earlier.
Thank you very much, John, for your excellent presentation. I have to say, on the contrary, you're always welcome, because what we need is a picture of the reality. So we really appreciate your comments and your inside views. Again, the European Chamber of Commerce is our cooperation partner, And of course, you're very welcome to join the Economic Chamber, European Economic Chamber first, but we hope you come first to us, to Delhi, and we will take care of you because we do it free of charge for the Austrian companies. I would like to mention also very briefly the double taxation agreement mentioned by John. This is something we have been pushing from our side several times. There were always something, there was elections and then somebody was not available, but this has a top priority, and not only for Austria, by the way, for all the other European member countries. Well, we are very interested in coming to a double taxation agreement with Sri Lanka. With this, I would like now to switch to the most important part I would say, in the export business, because without money, nothing happens. So co-financing and risk-sharing solutions, especially for projects, is of high interest, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Erwin Machert. He's Senior Director, Austrian Kontrollbank, Austria's export credit agency. Mr. Machert, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Robert. I have another something like minus 10 minutes left for my presentation. So I'll try to be very quick and fast to have some time left for questions. Very briefly speaking, who OeKB is, for those who have not been too much in touch with us, just to mention some of the figures: 150 countries for 3,000 clients roughly, and a total outstanding of guarantees of 28 billion. Last year, we had new guarantees issued in the size of roughly 6 billion euros. Just mentioning that to show where we are with those two countries, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Maybe the most important message in advance is, although the circumstances are not too easy, neither in Sri Lanka nor in Bangladesh, we are there and stay there to support the Austrian exporters in those countries. A lot was said about investment. Of course, we would also support investments of Austrian companies in those countries. I don't think this is too likely at the very moment. Regarding exports, what do we do in those countries? Sri Lanka, 74 million exports were mentioned from Austria to Sri Lanka last year. We had guarantee contracts issued last year in the size of 35 million Austrian euros. So we supported that a very large chunk of exports from Austria. Please don't be confused. It's not that automatically 50% of exports to Sri Lanka are supported by OeKB. No, it's rather that larger projects are issued, guarantees for those projects are issued in 1 year and are done in the next 2 to 3 years or something like that. We have a total outstanding portfolio in Sri Lanka of 192 million euros, and be surprised or not, 60% of those outstandings are in soft loans. Maybe it's a coincidence that the abbreviation of Sri Lanka and soft loan is the same. Regarding soft loans, many of you are aware of soft loans in Sri Lanka since you have done those or are preparing soft loans. It was mentioned by Thorsten earlier that the GDP per capita in Sri Lanka went down last year, which has the effect with regard to soft loans that we can do soft loans also in the forthcoming years. Soft loans were very important in the past. We have to make clear that they will still be important, but we will stick to our procedure in the last years. which is 2 projects which are already on the priority list between Sri Lanka and Austria. 60% soft loans, so 40% must be something else. I would like to put the focus on commercial financing for Sri Lanka. We were very successful, and Austrian companies and banks were very successful within the last years to switch from soft loans to commercial terms. And I truly believe this will be the right thing to do projects in Sri Lanka in the coming years. The same for Bangladesh. Exports are a little bit higher there from Austria. Last year we had very low amounts covered from for projects with Bangladesh, only 1.6 million. And we have a total outstanding of roughly 110 million euros. There we haven't done any soft loans so far, although those are possible for Bangladesh in sizes between 3 and 5 millions. There are some in the pipeline, but not very advanced. Projects we covered so far were all on commercial terms, and you might be surprised of 110 million transactions covered. A large chunk of those transactions covered were 2 larger projects in the field of metallurgical industry and power industry. Important to say for both countries, not only large projects are possible and important. We has had a quite nice trend in also providing cover for smaller projects, be it machinery and equipment for, let's say, the textile industry, for example, with amounts well below 1 million, somewhere in the range 500 million, 200 million. We are there for those projects and businesses too, which I think are quite likely also to happen right now. For the very large projects, for Bangladesh, I have to add, for the small projects, we are even in a position to do it on a real corporate risk basis. So we covered projects from Austrian companies to local companies without having a local bank involved. This will not be possible for very large projects. There we will have to look for bank securities like LCs or guarantees or bank-to-bank loans. A few minutes to the entire issue I should really talk about, except these 2 countries, but very generally speaking on co-financing risk-sharing solutions. I would like to give you a hint on what it can be to work together with other agencies, with other companies, with other ECAs from the OeKB side, just to give you a feeling what possibilities are there. One of those is if there are financing from international institutions, it was mentioned before, there might be some opportunities there. We can provide risk cover for production risk there, where you finally receive the monies from the international financial institutions. So this is a nice combination for Austrian exporters there. Another opportunity is to have a parallel financing by OeKB, covered by OeKB and financing with other ECAs, but also to have financing from OeKB for this other ECA part, and in parallel long-term financing by FDIs, usually happening for very large projects. A very reasonable source and very often used source of co-financing and risk sharing is reinsurance with other ECAs and private risk insurers. We succeeded to do a very large deal 2 to 3 years ago in the water distribution sector with reinsurances by private risk insurance. Don't be afraid of such structures. We are your partner there as a main insurer, and you can have reinsurance by other partners, but you are directly in contact with us. Of course, it's also possible the other way around, having OeKB as reinsurer. The positive thing there is refinancing from OeKB is possible for the total project volume there. The same applies even if other ECAs provide insurance. Let's take as an example, Euler Hermes does a project in Bangladesh with large sub-suppliers from Austria. Also there's the opportunity to provide OeKB refinancing for the total project amount if substantial Austrian sub-supplies are involved. And finally, something that I'd like to mention here, because we initiated last year a specific cooperation initiative between Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the DACH ECAs. They try to do and support projects together, provide promotion for common projects, and we and the others are very open to do such projects together, where refinancing is also available from OeKB for total project volume. I'd like to bring your attention to, it should go on, it's here, okay. Some useful links to have an idea what are the rates that you have to calculate within your calculation. Go into the country information to learn more about Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. We are open also in this crisis time. We are open for a project in those two countries. Look into the premium calculator to find an idea what the refinancing conditions and the guarantee charges would be for projects there. You can even go into the loan price to have it more precisely. And for any questions you may have, it's most likely the best way to get in touch directly and find out how we can support you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erwin, for your presentation. I think it was quite helpful and informative for existing, but also potential future business people who want to, do business in these two countries. Thank you very much. With this, we come to the last part of our webinar, questions and answers. So let me have a look at here the question panel. We received several questions. Let's see. Here's one. Thanks for the comprehensive presentation. This presentation goes to John. May I invite all the other panelists to switch on their cameras and their microphones so we can see them. Thanks for the comprehensive presentation, John. Our local representatives have recently informed us that it will be possible to travel to Sri Lanka from 1st of August onwards. Have the initial plans of the governments been changed over the last few weeks?
Exactly. So the plans did change. There were reports in the newspaper, I don't remember exactly when now, maybe about a week or week and a half ago, indicating that the reopening of the airport, the date for reopening of the airport would be pushed forward into September. A firm decision on when has not yet been taken, at least as far as we know, based on what we see in the papers.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question for Bangladesh. I don't know whether Chairperson Khan or Mrs. Begum wants to answer. In order to address COVID-19 situation, how public-private collaboration is working, and what do you think about the perception of the government in evaluating the present situation? I don't know who wants to take the question, Mr. Khan or Mrs. Begum?
Dasara, you want to answer? You can answer. Please do. I will answer. Okay. So on the public-private partnership, 5 organizations, including our build, has established a platform with the Dhaka Chamber, Metropolitan Chamber, Chittagong Stock Exchange, and Policy Exchange Research Institute to identify the impact and also the recommendation for the recovery in discussion with various stakeholders. We have identified, I think, 6 sectors, which are the SME sector, investments, agriculture, capital market, banks and finance, and I can't remember the other one. So we have been engaging with the policy planners and different ministers and also the secretaries in the ministries to inform them on, also to share our views on what are the impacts being created during the COVID, and what are the problems we are facing at the grassroots levels in terms of the biggest problem is the financing and also the revenue loss and employment to create sustainable employment and also business sustainability. So the engagement is well received by the policy planners, but we are pushing. As you know, in this situation, it's a very new situation for all of us. So we are going on a trial and error method. There is no foolproof process. So we are trying out various options. The government is willing. They have announced a very big stimulus package for the SME sector. So I would end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. Let me see here in the question function. Yeah, there is another question for OeKB. Erwin, is financing available only for large-size projects or also for the export of equipment and machines? Please, Erwin, you want to take this question?
Thank you, Robert. As I mentioned already during my presentation, I would really like to emphasize that financing is also available for smaller size projects. Those are done in a different manner, but still opportunities are there to provide longer term repayment for your customers in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh.
Thank you very much, Erwin. Another question comes in for Bangladesh. A number of tax supportive measures have been introduced for foreign investments as well as domestic investment. Still, the investment environment has not picked up yet. What do you think in that respect? I don't know.
Mr. Please go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Khan.
Please go ahead.
Actually, thank you very much for these questions, because the questions has brought a broader perspective in front of us. Because you know that in Bangladesh, as you have seen, some of the policies are very much appreciative and very much favorable for the foreign investors. And not only that, very recently, after the I think emergence of COVID, government is very serious and very sincere, and they have allowed a number of reforms and policy support for attracting the foreign investments, and not only the foreign investments but also the local investment. But the thing is that so far we have not been able to see the required investment as the country needs at the moment. As you have heard that only 1 or 2% of FDI is coming, of the GDP is in the country. So we need much more investment in our country. The thing what we believe is that as you have seen that the ease of doing business index, it is just going to be improved. Last year we have been able to, I think, reach, I think we have been able to advance 6 steps ahead. And these years also we are trying and thinking seriously that we would be able to reach within the 100 very soon. But these are the processes which are underway. So as soon as we have been able to present the country in such a manner that the country has already been able to achieve in this area, that is ease of doing business index is doing very good. Not only that, the logistics approach, infrastructural development, there are a number of mega projects are underway at the moment. All of these projects are in the process. So, you know that after the completion of these projects, or towards the close to the completion, I think we would be able to create more confidence on the investors. And I would also like to add that the Bangladesh Export Processing Zones, that is the BEZA, has already been able to target for 100 economic zones, and so far about 80 economic zones is in operation. But they are in the right at the primary stage, that is almost at the stage of starting their operation. So we hope and believe that within 5 to 6 years, Bangladesh will be able to be one of the heaven for the investors, and we will be able to attract more and more foreign investments and joint investments. And not only that, local investors will also coming up, I think, in a bigger way, much more bigger way in the country, because government is very serious and sincere, and policies are all very, very much favorable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Begum. I had a question also coming in for Sri Lanka, because we heard a little bit about One Belt, One Road initiative in Bangladesh. That is really very important, plays a very important role in building up the infrastructure. May I pose the question to Sri Lanka? What role does One Belt, One Road play in Sri Lanka? I don't know whether Torsten or John would like to take up the question.
Maybe I can come in from a more macro perspective. It plays a big role, of course. China was one of the few countries that continued supporting the government also during the civil war in 2009. And with the rollout of the Belt and Road Initiative, a number of mega projects were funded by China here. One sort of a particular example is a brand new port plus a brand new airport in the south of the country, Hambantota Port, a project of 7 or 8 billion, I think, but of course based on loans essentially that now the government has to pay back, and the port is empty, it is hardly used, and the airport is closed. What led the previous government then to rent out the port to China for a fee of 1.something billion. For 99 years. So there's a bit of a, that was the key example of the debt trap discussion here in the country, at least. There's also a huge project outside Colombo here. It went a little, relations continued, but went a little more, you know, out of the limelight under the previous government, who opened more again to the West and to the US. And now we have to see how the new government, who says it will have an equidistant, neutral foreign policy, in reality it means getting away from the West a bit, how they will balance the influence of China, but also with India, who doesn't want to leave this country in its immediate neighborhood, you know, under too big influence for China. So all this will play out. The great question is, well, how much money will China have left to do this sort of projects in the future? They also have to look at their own economy. So yeah, let me just stop here. Maybe John wants to add something.
John, you have to on your microphone.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, it's probably a question of wait and see. We have to see what the particular configuration and constellation of any new government is following on from the elections. And then you may well see an increase in Chinese influence. It's just wait and see.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to look a little bit at our watches. We are 30 minutes over time. Maybe we take one more question, and all the other questions which will not be answered, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, don't worry, we will send you individual responses. One more question here is to OeKB. Are there special instruments available at OeKB regarding the COVID-19 pandemic? Erwin, please.
Yes, definitely they are. They are for the Austrian companies themselves. We have implemented different opportunities for working capital financing in Austria to cross the bridge to better times after COVID. Of course, they are there. And specifically to target countries, there was a 100 million line called Fast Line, earmarked for projects in sectors like health, water, sanitation, where we try to be specifically fast, as it says, to support this project in a very quick and fast manner. So this is one of the opportunities we have there to support projects in target countries.
Thank you very much, Erwin. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we have come to the end of our program. I hope it was interesting for you. It was interesting for us as well, already in the preparation, because you have to imagine we are covering more or less, I am from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Austria. So it was quite a challenge technically, but we had a few glitches. Please, we are sorry for that, but I hope it was of interest for you. It's definitely, there are two very interesting and promising countries, despite the corona crisis and all the challenges connected with the crisis, and also, of course, other economic challenges we've heard today. I thank you very much for your attention. Very brief resume, of course, to please don't forget all the presentations will be available online soon. We will send you the link, and the webinar, the entire webinar as well, can be watched on YouTube. With this, thank you very much. All the best to you. Have a nice summer and best of success to you in the future in all your business endeavors. Thank you very much in the name of all the participants. Please wave goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Robert. Thank you.
So,
Bye.
Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.